welcome back to Psychedelics Today, a weekly podcast exploring the science and culture of the emerging psychedelic field with your hosts Kyle Buller and Joe Moore. Today on the show, I get to chat with Dr. Torsten Passie. Dr. Passie is a professor of psychiatry and psychotherapy affiliated with the Hanover Medical School in Germany. He's conducted clinical research on psychoactive drugs and has written books such as The Pharmacology of LSD and Healing with Entactogens. He was also a visiting professor at Harvard Medical School in 2012 to 2015. And from 1998 to 2010, he was a scientist and psychiatrist at Hanover Medical School in Germany, where he researched addictions and the psychophysiology of altered states of consciousness, their healing potential, and including research with hallucinogenic drugs, including cannabis, ketamine, nitrous oxide, psilocybin. And in 2012-2015, he was a visiting professor at Harvard Medical School. And he's also the author of a new book from Psychedelic Press called The Science of Microdosing Psychedelics. And this is a wonderful book, gives a really awesome overview of the history of microdosing, a lot of studies on what was done in the early years with low-dose psychedelics, and highly recommend this book. There's a nice quote by James Fadiman on the back here, his review. Finally, a book about microdose research I can recommend without reservation. So yeah, this is definitely a book if you're interested in microdosing. This is a must-have just because all the wonderful research that Dr. Passie has put into this to really kind of outline the history and just some of the early research done with mini dosing and low dosing. So make sure you go check that out. You can probably grab it on Amazon, or maybe go over to Psychedelic Press and check it out there. And this episode is also in conjunction with Breaking Conventions. Breaking Conventions is a psychedelic conference that is happening on August 16th to the 18th in London. So if you're in Europe, if you're in the UK, go check it out. It's August 16th to the 18th. If you're not from there, and if you can afford the trip over there, definitely suggest checking it out. Joe and I wish we were able to go. It's been on our list for a while. So hopefully next year or the next time they have it. I think they skip a year. But so go check out Breaking Conventions. It's a awesome conference. It has a really amazing lineup of speakers, and I think one of the biggest ones in Europe. So the website over there is breakingconvention.co.uk. And if you're listening to this episode past the conference date, just stay up to date. It's I think it happens every 2 years, I believe. So if you missed this year, that's fine. Just put it on your book, put it on your notebook, and just kind of circle back, because they will definitely be having more conferences in the future. So some of the stuff that Dr. Passie and I get to chat about, just how he got introduced to psychedelic research through a mystical experience that he had. And we go over a brief history of psychedelic research and non-ordinary states that was happening in Germany and Europe. We get into HPPD, hallucination persisting perception disorder. It's a really interesting disorder that some people claim with recreational use, and how people talk about seeing tracers, seeing visual snow, and so it could be the lingering after effects. So we talk a little bit about that because it's actually been coming up a bunch lately. So I was actually really excited to have him on the show to just have some to be able to ask some questions about it. And then we get into the history of microdosing and low-dose psychedelic research. So I think you'll really enjoy this episode, or I know you will. I had fun. The hour went by pretty quickly, so I wish I had more time to chat with Dr. Passie. And just want to thank him again for his time and for doing the interview with us. yeah, if you guys want to support the show, you make sure you subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're feeling called to it, you can leave a review on iTunes or Facebook. And, one of the best ways to really help support this is just share some of our content. Share it to your friends, colleagues, family. Just get the word out there about all the psychedelic research that is going on. And, share it on Facebook. If you're on Instagram, you could repost a photo or maybe share it to your story, screenshot what you're listening to and share it that way. I think that's one of the best ways to support us. And it really helps us spread the message. If you want to support us in other ways, Patreon, patreon.com/psychedelics today. And then we also have a donate page, psychedelics today/donate. And we also have some upcoming courses, the Navigating Psychedelics for the general cohort or general population, and then our Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists course. We have 2 sets of classes coming up in the fall, so go check that out. Check out the dates. You can learn more information at psychedelicstoday.com. Go over to the online courses, little nav bar, drop down, and then you can click the course that you're interested in there. And so we have some dates coming up, 2 starting. One in the early, I believe it's the one starts on September 11th and 10th, and then the next cohort starts mid-November. So go check that out. If you want to learn more about psychedelics, get educated. If you're a clinician and therapist and you just really want to dig deeper into the topic, you have clients that might be coming in talking about this. Maybe you don't know how to talk about this with them. Or maybe you're trying to figure out, hey, how do I get involved in all this? We explore all that in our Navigating Psychedelics course for clinicians and therapists. So definitely check that out. And I'll stop rambling, and I hope everybody enjoys this episode with Dr. Passie. All right, welcome back to Psychedelics today, everybody. Today I'm joined with Dr. Torsten Passie, author of Science of Microdosing and Psychedelics. Welcome to the show, Dr. Passie. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, hi.
So can you give a background to the listeners about who you are and some of your research that you've been doing in the realm of psychedelics?
Yeah, so I'm into researching psychedelics since 35 years now. I've also done a university career, becoming a professor of psychiatry and psychotherapy, and I was always specialized on the therapeutic use of psychedelic drugs, which was quite a different deal 25 years ago or even 10 years ago. It was very difficult to conduct research as well as finding people which might support you in a university environment. That was a hard thing to do during all these years which lay behind us.
Yeah, prohibition definitely has put some blocks on that, right?
And also the difficulty that you kind of ruin your university career if you are interested in psychedelics. Not right now, but years ago it was really hard to come through.
Yeah, I could imagine.
But I've gone my path anyway, and so I had the luck that some professors were kind of friendly about the topic, and so I could go on.
Yeah. What got you interested in wanting to research psychedelics?
Yeah, at first I experienced some mystical experience without psychedelics, and then I became really interested in mystical experiences, and then my search at that point of time in all the books and libraries, because I had to explain this experience, and I came also across the fact that there were other people which have done research in respect to mystical experiences using psychedelics, and then I became interested in that topic, and then I took some psychedelics, and I also had some mystical experiences, so I was quite enthusiastic that here we have a tool which we can use in an experimental fashion, and also which can induce these experiences, which are usually come spontaneously or through some spiritual practice or so, that we can conduct this research on an experimental basis using psychedelics and inducing mystical experiences in a more or less target-oriented fashion.
Right. Yeah, it's really interesting. And it's always interesting to hear how people have gotten really interested in this work through kind of spontaneous mystical experiences. It's always so interesting. Would you mind kind of sharing about what that experience was like, if you're open to it?
Yeah, sure. So in fact, I was a fisherman in the former times, and so I stared quite a bit, let's say for hours, on my little float. And then everything became one spontaneously, and I had immediately, intuitively, the realization that this was one of the most worthwhile experiences you can get, and therefore I became quite fascinated. But fascination was one thing. The other thing was that I was quite irritated because I have grown up as an atheist or a nature scientist kind of person. My father was an engineer, and therefore I was quite a sober, materialistic person. But after these experiences, I had to change quite a bit of my worldview and of my evaluation of things as well as religion and so on. And so this brought me in a very irritated, psychologically irritated state, so that I had to even go for therapy to integrate these experiences, which have kind of destroyed my former worldview.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that must be
so it's not always easy to integrate these kind of things, even if they are fascinating and of immediate value to yourself, but that might also destroy your worldview in a certain way. Yeah.
Right. You said they're not easy to integrate, correct?
Yeah, for me personally. But I heard from others that they had not such hustle and trouble like I had. But yeah, it depends on your worldview, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. A big thing here at Psychedelics today that we've been focusing on for the past few years is this concept of integration. And I'm wondering, you said it was kind of hard. Like, what was hard about integrating those experiences for you? Just, I'm guessing the worldview, but yeah. Yeah,
the main thing was that I was so much irritated, so it kind of, my former worldview was splattered. And I had no idea what to believe and what my faith should be and stuff like that, because the old one was destroyed, but there was no other one there.
Right.
And so I had to find out about that. And later on, it was also clear from these first experiences with the psychedelics that these substances might hold a very big promise for healing, because mystical experiences are also healing potentially, especially if you are in a kind of distrust about the world and others and so on, which might happen if you are an adolescent and you have some problematic experiences gone through. Then you might feel you can't trust anybody, you can't trust yourself and stuff like that, because you are still searching for identity and so on. And in this search for identity, it was very hard to have these experiences to be integrated, because my identity wasn't formed already, and so it kind of dissolved what I had formed already.
Right. And almost didn't have that new thing to attach to or move towards. It's like, all right, now what to do with all this? How did you go about trying to integrate a lot of that? Was that just through psychotherapy and trying to develop a new framework?
Yeah, it was. One thing was psychotherapy. The other was that at a certain point, because I studied philosophy and sociology at first, and also at a certain point, I realized that I'm so much fascinated by the psychedelics and their therapeutic potential that I have to alter my way of studying and the goal of what I want to be later on as a professional. And so I stopped studying philosophy and changed to medicine, which was also a very drastic change, because usually these medical doctors and how they study, they just learn stuff so that they can repeat it.
Right.
But they don't discuss stuff. They don't have a feeling for historical connections and for intellectual evaluation of certain topics. For example, during the whole way of studying medicine, you will be not informed that nature science is just a part of science.
Right.
You always think, oh, that's science. There's nothing else around it. Right? What is not true, for example. And so I in fact, to be honest, I hated medical students because they were just out for money, they were just out for prestige, for status, for these kind of reductionistic approaches to understand humans and so on. So I had a very hard time to cope with the fact that I had to study medicine instead of philosophy. But at last I did the decision under a certain pressure. It was more like an outside force which moved me in that direction, but I had to comply with it. Otherwise, I couldn't go further. And so it was very hard to me, but at last I decided to study medicine and to become a psychedelic doctor, which was absurd to say at that point of time in the mid-'80s.
Right. Was there anything going on?
But it was my way. And because I had this kind of this deep-reaching intuition that my way is connected to the psychedelics and to the altered states of consciousness, I was so sure feeling so safe with that is right and so on, that I became quite self-conscious later on, and said even to my student colleagues and later to my psychiatric colleagues, I told them, my tradition is 45,000 years old. It's proven. So you are the ones which are alien to healing and to medicine man-like capacities, and the use of altered states in medicine has a very, very long-reaching tradition. And so it reaches even back to the origin of mankind. And so therefore, I'm not a stupid guy, or I'm not a paradise bird, or what they ever called me. And so therefore at last I became very self-conscious that I'm on the right track. And just to mention that very important was Rick Doblin already in the 1980s, the guy who is the president of MAPS, that organization which tried to further research into psychedelics since the mid-'80s. And so I became kind of connected to him and to his organization. And so through them, I also became stabilized that I'm on the right track and that I'm doing the right thing, even if the circumstances at the time were not really furthering that or saying that you're doing the right thing. They might even say you're doing the wrong thing. You're an idiot. You're ruining your career. You're searching for a topic which is not worth it. These are dangerous drugs, and et cetera, et cetera. On the other side, I also have to mention that I was, I was embedded in a certain climate in Germany in the 1990s, where a lot of scientists were still interested in researching altered states, as well as some of them researching into psychedelics. And so therefore, there was a certain structure which I felt safe with more and more,
Right, yeah, and I was going to ask, what was the climate like in Germany? Was there any research in altered states going on when you finished medical school, or did you just kind of be like, now what am I doing? And MAPS kind of showed up.
The problem was, during the 1980s and 90s, we had some research going on here in Germany with psychedelics and also with altered states, but there was nobody at the university really doing that.
Gotcha.
It means these researchers were older ones, they kind of being the umbrella where others could conduct some tiny studies, but there was nobody there at the university. And so I had the luck that somebody who was hired at our university as the chair of the psychiatry department, this guy was quite open in a lot of respects. And he also furthered my research and said, that's good what you're doing. They have left these substances without any good reasoning. And so therefore we might hold on with that research and go further. And this is how I found a kind of channel where I could go through even in a university environment.
Yeah.
Yes, and so I conducted some clinical studies with some psychedelic drugs during that time at the university where I was kind of nearly 20 years.
That's awesome. And what type of studies were you conducting at that time?
Quite a bit, mainly clinical experimental studies with some psychedelic drugs or drugs which can alter your consciousness, like laughing gas or ketamine or psilocybin or MDMA or cannabis. Our department was quite a bit into cannabis.
Oh, wow.
Even that was quite unusual at that point of time. But my chief was kind of fascinated by cannabis as a medication as well as an experimental drug where you can do some experimental studies with.
Yeah, that's interesting. What type of things were you looking into with cannabis? Like, how was that being used as a medication at that time?
Yeah, we were mainly looking out for in how far we could use some cannabinoids to treat psychosis.
Oh, interesting.
By the way, we were not very successful with that. But later on, it came out that CBD might be a neuroleptic or an antipsychotic drug. And interestingly, the first study with CBD was conducted by someone who was also a member of our department at that time.
Oh, no way.
But it was very hard for him to come through because nobody would give him money for his research. At last, the Ministry of Health gave him money. Because they had some anecdotal data that might be a good neuroleptic drug with a lot less side effects than the usual drugs.
Right.
But nobody was interested because CBD, as it is called today, is a drug which you can't patent.
Right.
Because it's so old, right? And so, you have to find independent money sources for this kind of research, which was very hard to find at that time. But however, we could conduct some studies from a very low budget. It became much more complicated when Europe had established some new laws about clinical studies. And so since 2005, you could say, virtually nothing happened anymore because you have to fulfill so much requirements equivalent to the requirements of the pharmaceutical industry. But you are a little scientist who want to conduct some studies with 10 people, healthy volunteers or something like that. And the absurdity is that you are under the same requirements by European laws as the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, if the pharmaceutical industry has to conduct animal studies to put something into humans later on, they will do that with quite easy because they have a lot of money.
Yeah.
But if you have a few thousand euros, you can't conduct anything anymore because you need animal tox studies and this kind of stuff which might cost $1 million or so. So virtually every research was stopped after 2004 when these new laws came up.
Jeez.
Before we were quite able to do some stuff if you are really interested and you could prove that you are competent and your department might know how to handle these drugs and you know everything about them or something like that. You had to prove that. But otherwise, the health authority were very sober in respect to psychedelics, so they give you immediately permission if you are the right one in the right context.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and it seems so limiting with the money factor because there's probably so much cool research that people want to do, but the laws kind of prohibit that at times. But I mean, it's exciting now. There seems to be a lot more research happening, and that's really exciting.
That's true. Since 10 years, or you could say even 20, since 20 years, something is going on, and during the last 10 years, it really kind of escalated or became much broader. But on the other side, we are still a tiny little bit of science, just not the trendsetters or something like that. But it looks like it could be more during the next 10 years or so.
Yeah. It seems like a really exciting time to get involved in all this and have interest.
Yeah.
Is there?
And it's quite astonishing for me too, after kind of 30 years being on my own, kind of.
Right. Yeah. I hear that from a lot. I hear that from a lot of people that got started early on, and they are like, I never really thought I would see this day where we're getting so close, and even. Yeah. When I started to become really interested in this and decided to go to school to study transpersonal psychology and counseling and all this, I was like, oh, I don't know, this might be pretty far away. And it's like every year something just keeps coming out and it just seems to get be quicker and quicker. It's pretty exciting. Right. Is there any research happening in Germany now? Are you conducting any research over there?
Yeah, I'm conducting research, but it is, how should I say, it's not clinical research using psychedelic drugs in the direct sense. Conducting experiments with them or so. But you can also do research in a lot of other respects. For example, when I was these few years at Harvard Medical School in Boston. We conducted a study on people which have claimed that they had a kind of after effects from taking hallucinogenic drugs, like a durable alterations of perceptions, which are still there after years, when they took years later after they took the drug. And for example, we have explored these people because there are a lot of rumors out about these kind of complications, what they call hallucinogen-induced perceptual disorders. And we find quite a bit out about it, especially in respect to other psychopathological features which these people might have already before they took the drug, stuff like that. Right. And other things are, I've conducted a study about self-experiences with psychedelic substances or with psychoactive substances, going through all the literature which has been written about these self-experiments. But interestingly enough, it is quite a usual thing in medicine that people do self-experiments. They even put a catheter in their body, the doctors, stuff like that. But interestingly enough, if you look at these treatises or books which have been written about the self-experiments by doctors, they never mention self-experiments with psychoactive drugs. Well, that was pretty interesting to look all through all this literature.
Yeah, why do you think that is? It's an interesting topic because, you know, in the sense of like training and understand this, I know it's a debate within this community of like having your own experience, self-experimenting, and then versus not having it, so you're not biased with the research or anything like that.
Yeah, that could be one thing, that you get biased. On the other thing, you have to have some knowledge from the inside, so to say, otherwise you can't conduct research appropriately.
Right.
And so therefore it's still a matter of debate somewhat if therapists, for example, using psychedelic drugs should have self-experiences or not.
Yeah.
Right. And recently a journalist came across me and said, okay, I have interviewed people about their opinion about this topic of having self-experiences as a therapist, and they argued, oh no, it's not necessary. You don't do electroconvulsive therapy on yourself if you want to conduct it on patients. Yeah, okay, that's right. But you have to have a certain understanding. And for example, in psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, it is quite normal that you go through your own teaching analysis so that you know what's happened during this kind of therapeutic work.
Right.
So this is a standard. Right? And if you look further back with the shamans, for example, it's also obvious that they had, how should I say, self-experience. It was their job.
Yeah.
To have these kind of experiences and explore them and these states and the recognitions you have with them and so on. So I don't think that it is appropriate to have somebody conducting psychedelic or psycholytic sessions without any self-experience. And if you ask therapists, they would always claim that it's better if you have some of these experiences, you know.
Right, yeah, and so I'm happy to hear that MAPS has included that into their training protocol to be able to have.
Yeah, sure. It's really important to my eyes, and even these altered states induced by psychedelics in therapeutic settings, they are more safe in general, but you can confront a lot of different reactions by different people, and also with one person during different sessions. And so, if you can't follow that, or if you have no idea what's going on in the person, that's really not a good thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been training with breath work for about 9 years, and I even think about that. Part of the training is doing your own work, and there's so much stuff that, like, holding space. I can't imagine just going to hold space without really knowing what the experience is like. I'd be like, what the hell's going on here?
Yeah.
And there's so many complexities, right? Like it changes over time and you have different experiences and you go, oh, I had no idea that existed. Yeah.
And so I think still that it is quite important. But on the other side, if you look at the dangers of self-experiments with psychoactive substances, not in the sense of having flashbacks later on or having an anxiety reaction when you are under the influence of the drug, I mean in the long run. So if you if you look from a historical point of view, what happened to people which have done self-experiences quite a bit, then you will see that they sometimes become socially autistic, you could say.
Right.
That they think, oh, we are in possession of a certain knowledge, and that's very important, so we are important, and blah, blah, blah. So sometimes they become gurus. Sometimes they don't want to be scientists anymore, which when you look at Leary, for example, Timothy Leary in the U.S., this kind of stuff can also happen, so they lose their scientific objectivity.
Right.
So there is a certain danger that might happen, but not if you do 1, 2, 3 self-experiences in the course of an educational process to become a psychedelic therapist. Never anybody claimed that is a danger.
Right.
Yeah. And that you will lose objectivity. You can't lose objectivity in that sense, because psychotherapy is eminently subjective anyway.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
I mean, and if you can perform better because you have some ideas what's going on in the patient and which might move him around, then it's much better, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about, like some of how these experiences can really affect our lives. Yeah, it's really interesting.
But also these dangers have to be a topic too. And I've written a contribution for the Handbook of Experimental Psychopharmacology about this, the history of self-experiences with psychoactive drugs. And there you can see that there are some dangers going in parallel with that, or associated with these self-experiments.
I'll have to check that book out. That sounds really interesting. I want to come back to the topic of HPPD. It's been a really interesting topic that I've definitely have had experience with it, and so it's always been kind of like a personal topic. But it actually recently came up on our Twitter. There was a Twitter thread. That somebody's really talking about, there's all this research happening, but nobody's doing research on HPPD and the harms of this. So, I would love to just kind of dig into that, because I think it's kind of a new topic for a lot of people, and it's a topic that actually came up in we teach a course as well, and a few of our students really wanted to learn more about it. And so, what did some of your research conclude with that?
So this is a complex matter in general. It is, first off, if you publish a case study saying there is somebody here who claims that he has permanent visual aberrations throughout the day after he took LSD some months ago, then you could easily publish such a case because it's suggesting dangers. Mm-hmm. If you would try to publish a case where somebody has very much profited from an LSD-induced mystical experience, you will be not allowed to publish that.
Right.
Because it's just one case, and it's eminently subjective. You don't know. But with these visual aberrations, you can't objectify them. You can just trust the person,
right,
that he's saying something right. Stuff like that. And so my personal opinion is that quite a bit of these case reports are fake, so to say. Not intentionally by the scientists, but they are not really catching the phenomenon. Right. This is what I think. So there is quite a selection bias in what you can publish and what not. If you can suggest a danger, then they will publish it. If you suggest something positive from a psychedelic, you will be having a hard time to publish it. And so that is one thing. The other thing is that, meanwhile, we have documented a few of these cases, let's say about 100 in the scientific literature, but you might wonder why during the 1950s and 60s, when psychedelics were on the rise and hundreds or thousands of studies were conducted, even with humans, nobody ever claimed that this phenomenon came up. Nobody. And this is what I really wonder about, that right now, after one guy who has conducted suspicious studies, obviously suspicious studies, his name is Abraham, since that time, everybody claims, I found such a case. And so you could be skeptical about it. To come back to our research, what we have done is we really examined these people which claim that they have these phenomena going on. And what we found is that they have a certain psychopathological pattern, so to say. They are prone to anxiety. For example, these are some general things which on the average are true, and they also have a tendency to dissociate, which means you kind of getting a distance inside yourself about yourself.
Right.
So to say. You're going out of the situation somewhat, in your inner realm. And so to protect yourself or whatever. But this is also a feature of these HPPD people. They are prone to anxiety, they have dissociative tendencies, and that was the most interesting finding, they virtually all of them had these visual phenomena before they started hallucinogen. And so therefore you don't know what really caused it, right?
Right. So some of those people did report some sort of visual thing before they took it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Virtually all of them.
Huh.
So they had a certain vulnerability already in that realm. If you want to say that they kind of, they are not having just what they had already, if something was added by the consumption of the hallucinogen, it might be true, but it's really hard to find it out. Right. Because you can't objectify it as easily.
Yeah.
And there are no objective measures or alterations of brain function in the long run, which you could say, which you could explore and say, okay, you have an EEG, an electroencephalogram with certain aberrations seen after a hallucinogen consumption or so. But this is not the case. And so all this realm is very much subjective. And it seems overlaid by a lot or based on a lot of psychopathology which was in the individual who claimed later to have HPPD. They had a lot of psychopathology on board already.
Gotcha.
And so it's really complex to evaluate what happens there. My fear, kind of 15 years ago when I started researching that topic, was that the insurance companies might say, oh, you can't conduct hallucinogen research anymore because it's so dangerous that people might get a durable disturbance or illness from that.
Right.
And we will not give you security or insurance for your studies. That was a fear of mine, that we might get hallucin research forbidden because you can do long-term damage.
Right.
Right. But right now, it seems that was never a problem. It might become a problem in the future. But interestingly enough, so there were kind of estimates that 1 out of 100,000 people taking an hallucinogenic drug will develop that condition.
And I remember,
that's really not much.
And I remember reading that it seems mostly associated with LSD use in a recreational setting. Like the rates obviously go down in clinical. It's really not there in clinical settings. But do you think there's something? Right. Do you think there's something there with the LSD use? Could it be adulterants as well? Like depending on what the person's taking.
No, I wouldn't believe in these kind of additional substances which you might consume because of that the drug is not pure or so. I don't believe in that. So interestingly enough, the American Diagnostic Manual includes HPPD, but the World Health Organization claims that it's not existing. So they don't have a category for that.
Yeah.
What does that suggest? I don't know, but they might ignore it, possibly. But on the other side, the evidence is not really hard.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I think they implemented it in the American Diagnostic Manual because it suggests a danger taking hallucinogens.
Right.
And that's what they are, how should I say, this is what they believe.
Yeah.
And so therefore, they included that, I think. Yeah, but the World Health Organization might be more skeptical and looking more for universal things like, can you find it in India? And it was never reported there, but people are taking hallucinogens there too. So what would you think about it?
Yeah. And it's just a really interesting observation and I guess thought about the anxiety and dissociation. I'm just reflecting on my own personal experience. And, I did have a lot of trauma leading up to some of this from a near-death experience that I had from a snowboarding accident, and I already had a lot of like that anxiety and dissociation from that, and I always kind of thought that it had to do with more anxiety, kind of psychosomatic things, and once I started working with it, it kind of started to go away. But I think it's kind of like an anxiety trauma thing too.
Yeah, it could be involved. And what I have found here with German people which have claimed to have HPPD and consulted with me, and I found that these guys had a kind of anxiety-driven chronic derealization syndrome, so that you sometimes feel disconnected or detached from the environment or in a chronic way. And you kind of feel or think that the environment around you is somewhat unreal.
Right.
They have that in a very chronic kind of fashion. This is what I have seen here in Germany when the people claimed that they had HPPD. Right. But this was a chronic condition which was already kind of there before they took the hallucinogen. It might have increased it or so.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense thinking back to my experience. Kind of trying to process that near-death experience. I mean, coming back from dying, I was really kind of dissociating, be like, what's going on here? So, I mean, that totally makes sense. I kind of like that perspective. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about microdosing. Since you wrote this book on microdosing, so could you give I think most of our listeners know what microdosing is, but could you run through like a brief little history about how this trend came to be and some things that you've learned along the way from writing this book?
It was originally, I didn't intend to write a book about microdosing, but what I realized is from my immense knowledge about the topic of psychedelics, and I've searched through the past during these 30 years where I couldn't do so much. I have read virtually everything, and there are thousands of studies out there. And I was wondering when I was looking at the microdosing hype or this new trend, I was wondering that nobody ever mentioned all the studies which have been conducted during the 1950s and 60s about these low dose or even microdoses. And so I was wondering that nobody has done a research or looked out for research studies. And so I came to the conclusion, okay, let's do it. I mean, let's write what has been done in the microdosing or mini-dosing range. So this is a differentiation what can be done or can be made and make sense. So microdosing would be taking psychedelics in a kind of sub-perceptual range where you can't feel anything immediately from the acute effects, like an LSD dose of 5 to 15 micrograms. It is known from the studies in the past that you don't feel any acute effect from these very little doses. You can't measure any effect. And so this is microdosing. The other thing is mini-dosing, which is kind of 20 to 50 micrograms of LSD, for example, so that you feel somewhat something, but not as much as with the usual psychedelic trip, which might be in the range of 150 to 250 or so. Right? So you might find it usable to use these very low doses, but they have their own specifics and own problems. So if we talk about microdosing, usually it is a range of 5 to 50. If you look in the internet. If you look at some definitions, for example, Fadiman's definitions, Jim Fadiman, who was the kind of origin of that microdosing hype in a way, he says below 20 is microdosing. Above 20, it's something else. We call it mini-dosing, but that's not microdosing in the strict sense. But if you look at all the reports in the internet, you will see that most of them felt immediately something. And that would be in the range of mini-dosing. I think it's important that we differentiate between these different modalities so that we don't confuse it. Right. And it seems that from the research in the past, as well as confirmed right now through some few studies which have been conducted already this year and last year, you can see that the acute effects, what the people feel, even in respect to any effect, they virtually feel nothing below 20 micrograms. And this has been known from the past, the studies which have been conducted too, that below 20 there's virtually no effect. And this is what's already confirmed with these new studies, which have also found virtually no effect with these very low doses. The conventional research in the past has also shown that virtually all cognitive abilities are kind of decreased or disturbed by taking a psychedelic.
Right.
So it seems a little strange that a lot of people claim that they had a better performance on an intellectual level. Somewhat hard to believe. What is also known from the conventional research is that in some psychomotoric abilities, they called it that way, it means, for example, holding a pencil in a certain way and reacting to some stimuli with that pencil and bringing it down or writing something immediately or so. In these respects, you are quicker with very low doses. But this is not connected to creativity. This might be connected to driving or something like that, these kinds of things to perform. But it's not having no connection to creativity, and it's also no connection to cognition in the conventional sense. If you, for example, give the people some math exercises, did I say that right? Some mathematics to calculations to conduct or so, and then you will see they go down with their performance. Immediately, especially if they feel something from the drug, like 25 or 50. Right. And so it can be a very smooth effect with these low doses, but it is appropriately lower than with the higher doses. It means if you go down, 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 all the effects go down, down, down too. So it is not the case, as it was to my eyes and my experience, that in the low dose range, you will find different effects, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't believe in that. So you find the same kind of effects, but very small. But there is a kind of line you could make it. If you decrease the dose, all the effects are decreased. There's nothing what you find at 20 micrograms which goes up or something like that. Like you have another effect or so. This was a kind of skepticism which I didn't have as much. But for example, David Nichols, the professor of pharmacology, the world-leading LSD expert in respect to pharmacology of LSD, he said from the beginning on, he's very skeptical about it. He thinks it's mainly kind of placebo effects, and also you might strengthen your placebo reaction if you feel something, whatever it is. It might be even diarrhea or something. I mean, any kind of little effect what you get from a drug might suggest to you that something is going on, and then you are kind of a placebo, much more likely a placebo responder because you feel something.
Yeah, where do you stand on that?
There's something going on,
Where do you stand on the placebo effect for microdosing? Do you think it is placebo, or do you actually think, there might be something to this that people are reporting?
Yeah, I think both is true. A lot is placebo effects, but people might also report something which is there, especially if it comes to repeated dosing. We don't know anything from a scientific point of view right now about that as much. There was just one study in the mid-1950s, where they have treated depressives with doses of 10 to 30 micrograms of LSD. They have treated kind of 25 patients, and they couldn't find any positive effect with depression. And they have done that on a kind of daily basis, right? Yeah. Which might make a difference. If you dose every third day, as it was suggested in these microdosing entries in the internet, then it might be different. We will find out that because one study was conducted 2 years ago, the results are not published up to now, but they have also tried to treat people which were not patients, they were healthy volunteers, with a dose every third day for 18 days. So we might find out something about that. Otherwise, it seems right now from the studies what had been published during the last 2 years that there is a very, very small effect, if there is any effect. One study even said there is no effect.
No effect, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. What is it? Imperial Beckley, they're are self-funding that self-blinding study. So it'll be interesting to see what they get out of that, even though it's like all self-reported, but at least it's something. Why do you think that this is like taken off, and why people are so interested in it? I'm guessing because of the creativity and, wanting to boost performance and whatnot. But.
Yeah, that's right. So the performance issue I'm critical about. But in respect to creativity, you know that there are some, not much, but some studies have said in the past that if you take higher doses of psychedelics and have an appropriate environment to conduct creativity tasks, then you might find some positive effects on creativity with high doses.
Right. Well, that's what Fadiman was trying to do.
Or something like, of LSD. But they have also conducted creativity studies with lower doses in the past already, and thoroughly done studies, and they couldn't find any effect. We could criticize and say, okay, you did not put the people in the right circumstances to express creativity, because you put them in front of a computer or so and let them do some tasks.
Right.
Even if these tasks are somewhat related to creativity, you can't say if this task doesn't show anything, you have no increase in creativity. For example, it is known that music was very much influenced by the psychedelics, so there must be a creative potential in them of furthering creativity. And to my eyes, the more free the circumstances of the experiments are, the more you see in respect to furthering creativity.
Right. That
was already shown in the past. So there was an virtually unknown study in Germany, for example, with some 30 very prominent German artists in the 1960s already at the Psychiatry Institute, where they have made them painting, right? And you could easily find in that book about the study that their creativity was definitely furthered. But they were left quite free in the experiment itself.
And what type of dose were they taking?
I think they took between 100 and 200.
Okay, so
micrograms of LSD,
a little bit of a higher dose.
This was not a low dose study. That was a higher dose study, so to say. Yeah. What one could argue about microdosing or mini-dosing is that your cognitive system will be irritated by the drug. And sometimes you are getting if you try to solve a problem, a certain one, you might tighten up your cognition or your cognitive apparatus in that sense that you are too much fixed on the solution. You think, oh no, I have to find it and it must be in that direction and blah blah blah. So if you would be distracted in respect to your usual train of thought, then you might find the solution.
Right.
Right? So in a sense of an irritating effect, that might further creativity, even if it's irritating.
Right.
And even if your cognition is kind of a little bit fragmented, that might help if your cognition is too much fixed on a certain topic or a certain way of finding a solution. And then that might be helpful, I think.
Yeah.
What is also thinkable is that these kind of flow states might be somewhat furthered by psychedelics. But from my own experiments, I just can say it wasn't the case in the low dose range. You got irritated, you got detached somewhat from the environment, and your sensory perception wasn't, as far as I have experienced it, and others which I know of too, it was more reduced instead of increased.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've had a few martial artists on the show in the past talking about microdosing or taking very low doses and practicing and training. And they talk about the flow state, how they're able to kind of just flow with their body, get in touch with their body a little bit more. So I don't know. That's interesting. Have you seen anything like that or talk to people that recorded?
I have already mentioned that these psychomotor abilities, as they were called, it means your ability to react to things in if you see something and you have to react to it, reaction time for example. And these psychomotor abilities, they might be increased somewhat. And so therefore that could correlate with what you said about these people with martial arts, that they can perform a little better. That might be true even from the scientific point of view and the studies we already have. That they might increase their performance somewhat. But I would say this is in a range of 10 to 20% at maximum.
Right. Yeah.
They don't do it the double, the better 100% or something like that. No. It's a slight increase in performance.
Yeah, and it seems like from the people that we talk to, just a little bit more in touch with their body, and they're able to maybe not think about making a move, right? They're a little bit, I'm going to let my body respond versus my mind responding. Yeah.
Exactly. So what I've also heard from people microdosing is that they felt like the basis of their perception, how should I express it? I mean, how you react in a holistic sense to your environment. It means your receptivity. That's the right word. Your receptivity about stimuli from the world might be altered in that sense that not the stimuli will perceive differently, but it will it felt on a different kind of ground in your psyche or so. So the general receptivity on a very basic level might change, so that these are claims also about microdosing, that you might think differently about going to McDonald's on the day or not. You know this. Usually you might go on a reflex, like, oh, there's McDonald's, oh, let's go.
Right.
That kind of thing. So the basic receptivity of your mind or your soul, that might be altered in a very subtle sense. It will not better mankind as much, right? But it might alter your performance, your receptivity, your perception very, very little bit, but in the right direction.
Yeah.
Could be.
And Hoffman did a little bit of experimenting with it, and he seemed pretty hopeful about microdosing kind of like as an antidepressant. Is that correct? Like, he was really interested in it, but probably didn't do it as much as some people thought.
Yeah, that's right. And what I have found is that in an interview in the 1970s, he was asked about what could be another than psychedelic application of LSD in the future. And in this interview, he stated very low doses, like 25 micrograms, might be used as an antidepressant drug. And as far as I've heard from some sources, he was even eager to inspire his company that they would do these kind of studies about it. And they evaluated it, but they came to the conclusion it's not worth it. For whatever reason. They even planned to bring out very small LSD pills with an emetic, combined with an emetic drug, where you have to vomit from if you take a higher dose from it.
Oh, interesting.
So that might hinder the abuse of the drug,
right,
so to say. So if you take just one pill of, let's say, 15 micrograms, you will have no vomiting and no nausea. But if you take 2 or 3 or 4, then you might have it. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's a kind of protection against misuse or so. Even they have thought it so far, but they never came up with it. And this study from the 1950s with the depressive patients also gave no real idea that might be useful in depression. Hofmann himself has experimented quite a bit with very low doses, and I, meanwhile, think that after he took the first intentional dose of LSD with 250 micrograms, he got a psychotomimetic reaction. So he felt completely anxious, he was sweating, he was completely irritated, he felt psychotic, in fact. And so, because of this first trip, it seems that all the other researchers, which have been informed by Sandoz and Hofmann and so forth, have conducted their studies with very low doses. For example, 20 to 40 micrograms. So that the people will not be pushed into a psychotic-like state.
Right.
They were really anxious about that. And for example, the first study at the Zurich University Psychiatric Clinic conducted in 1945, they were always from 10 to 40 micrograms, not higher. Yeah. And so we have quite a bit of information about the effects of these very low doses. What they, by the way, found is that the reaction in respect to mood with these mini doses are very different. Some people felt a little bit euphoric and then depressed. Some people felt depressed and later on euphoric. Some had a lot of changes during the, so to say, trip, right? But there was no consistent pattern. I think from these 30 people which they have put it under the work, they had kind of 10 different reactions in respect to mood, especially in the course of the reaction.
And when they were when they were experimenting with this, was this in conjunction with therapy, or it was just kind of they were giving it to them in a clinical setting without the therapy in low doses?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it was just in experiment studies, and most of the subjects were in fact physicians, partially being kind of dosed with the drug, let's say 25 or something micrograms, and then they were sent on their ward to do their usual work. And then they looked up how much were they irritated. Could they still conduct bureaucratic work on their work desk and with the patients, or were they so much irritated that they couldn't do it? And they have seen different pictures. Some of them were not able to conduct the appropriate workday, and some were kind of doing quite well so far. But all of them reported strange effects, like having paranoid thoughts that everybody sees that they are under a drug, stuff like that. Nobody was seeing it because it was very low. Right. And these descriptions are pretty interesting, and I put a lot of work into translating these German reports into English and put some in the book so that people can see. And it is also interesting insofar as these people were not as much informed in advance what they would experience. Right, because it was quite a new drug. Nobody knows.
Yeah, they didn't have all that research and stuff to read about.
Yeah, they didn't have so much prejudices on board, so to say. On the other side, they also had not on board the idea that might be a positive effect.
Right.
And so they reported mainly bad effects. Irritated, bad mood, lability. They couldn't interact as easily with their colleagues and stuff like that. You know, they had no idea that it could be a positive thing. So they might have been suggested negatively or had a negative prejudice, even that might be a drug which might irritate you with your performance and so on.
Right. So I wrote down this little section here in my notes on the book that just really stuck out to me, and I think because I have a somatic orientation, Stolarov using low doses, talking about how, typically we might go around being a little anxious or we just feel a little uneasy at times, and that low doses can actually kind of exacerbate that, and maybe that's why some people don't like that. But you wrote that he was saying that actually might be a really good thing to actually stick with those unpleasant feelings to be able to resolve it. And so I guess I'm curious, a lot of the psychedelic therapy is more kind of psychedelic therapy oriented versus low dose psycholytic therapy. And I just wonder, coming from the somatic approach of actually sticking with these anxieties that come up and make us feel unpleasant, I don't know. There seems like there's something there to be able to kind of stick with that in low doses and be able to do a lot of deep somatic work. Yeah.
This seems to be an interesting idea to me, to combine these kind of subtle, somatically accentuated feelings from the low dose range of LSD or psilocybin to use them in a context of body work, for example.
Yeah.
That could be a good idea to my mind, but this is very speculative. And we also have to realize that nobody ever reported what Stolarov has reported.
Right.
So that it might be useful to stay with these emotions and so on and so on. So I have no idea. And from my personal experiences, my tendency to repeat low dosing with in the range of 20 to 50 micrograms of LSD, my ambition to repeat these experiences is very low because it just kind of irritated me. And the flow state or whatever people think they experience, I didn't have that. And I've also, this is why I'm talking about it so openly, because I've meanwhile spoken with quite a bit of people and they always told me the same thing. In respect to there's no flow induced, there's more like in detachment from the environment and even a kind of a little bit of clouding of consciousness. Right. So that you're getting kind of numb a little.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess it's interesting even looking at like some of the MDMA studies, the low dose has actually exacerbated the PTSD and anxiety. And it seems where are these sweet spots here? And like what is actually beneficial? Maybe these low doses aren't. Maybe it's just really exacerbates your anxiety and that's really not helpful.
It could happen in a few cases. On the other side, we don't know still if it might be helpful somewhat with anxiety if you take it on a chronic basis, so to say, every third day or so. We have no results about that. We have to be honest about that. So we don't know. It is not very probable, as it seems right now from the data, but we still don't know exactly. To just mention something else, which I have not mentioned in my book as much, is the fact that some people report, which are more into the matter, so to say, that they could alter an experience with another psychedelic by taking a microdose in advance. Before they the course would be you take a microdose, let's say, of LSD, and then you take another psychedelic drug an hour later. And the effects of, but the second drug would be full dose, right?
Interesting.
And these people have told me that the effects of the full dose might be altered somewhat because you took a microdose in advance. It has a certain pharmacological logic with it, insofar as it might be possible that some receptors are already kind of activated or occupied by the microdose, and so the effect of the full dose of another psychedelic might go in a different direction because it can't occupy the receptors as much, and so on. Another idea about this is that even with drugs, taking a microdose of a drug which interacts with other receptors than your major drug, where you take a full dose of, even that might alter the experience of the full dose, the psychedelic.
Yeah.
Right? I think that from a pharmacological point of view, that definitely makes sense, that could happen. And quite a bit of reports in the newest waves, so to say these kinds of things. Right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. How about any dangers or risks? I know Nichols and a few other people really put out the, LSD and stuff like that binds to the 5-HT2B. Enough of that also might be thickening heart valve. And I know that was associated with another compound. What was it? Fen is the name sometimes used. I can't think of the actual name.
Methylgide, yeah. A few things about that. One is it is important to know that there is a confusion about these heart valve changes. These are, in general, some of your tissues might become fibrous in character and harden, which can be a heavy load on your body. For example, if the tissue around your ureters, where you pee through, so to say, which comes from the kidney to the bladder, right? Some people experience the tissue surrounding your ureters might become fibrous, and so that they kind of close their tube. Right? That can happen. But what most people don't know are two facts. One is, if the people state in the scientific literature, this is dose independent, this effect. This is what Nichols somewhat relies on. He says, okay, if the dose is not saying how much is the probability that you will get these fibrous changes.
Right.
If the dose is not significant for that, it doesn't mean that you can take one dose and you will have it. No, you have to take it on a daily basis to get these kind of things. And just 1 out of a few hundred patients will get that with a high dose on a daily basis. And the second fact, what is not much known, is that if they had confronted this kind of complication with an LSD-related medication in the past, when you stop the medication, this stuff will go away again, these changes of the tissue.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
This is usually not mentioned.
Right, so it's reversible if anything did happen.
There's just one case documented ever where it hasn't been gone away. Okay. And there are thousands of cases.
Huh.
So this is not such a big of a danger. On the other side, it is important to be careful because we don't know what will happen in the organism if you take it on a daily basis for years. They have done that with these headache medications, methylphenidate, which is kind of related to LSD, but we don't know if LSD will do the same thing. We, as pharmacologists, we don't think so. But it might be possible, and this is what David Nichols warn about. Yeah. But I personally don't think that there's a real danger in that respect.
Well, it's good to know to clear up.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I'm gone with my thought. Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah. Did you get it back? No.
Yeah. What do you mean?
I said, did you get your thought back? I wasn't too sure if you were starting to speak again.
No.
Cool. Well, we're about at an hour. Well, we're actually over an hour at this point. So is there any last takeaways that you have about just, your research in microdosing that you think it's important for listeners to know about?
One thing is, I want to mention that, to my eyes, if there is any working mechanism in respect to microdosing, which we already could talk about, it is a mechanism which is active during your sleeping time. There were some experiments in the 1950s and 60s where they have injected people during the nighttime with some LSD when they already had fallen asleep.
Huh.
And what they have shown is that the REM phases, the dream phases in sleep, are altered in most people, even by very low doses. And so this might be also an indirect effect, which you might carry on for days. Right? So if I would have the task of looking into a mechanism about microdosing, I would look out for dreaming. It is not that your dreams are altered to more bizarreness or more heavy load in the dreams or stuff like that. It's not that. It's just that the extension of the REM phases or the range of the REM phases, the REM phases got longer. Initially, the initial REM phases in a night of sleep. The phases later on, they got smaller or they decrease. And so at last, the whole amount of REM sleep might even be the same. But there are definite changes. And they have conducted 2 studies independently, and both find the same kind of effect, even with very, very low doses.
Yeah, that's.
And so, therefore, I think if you have a different sleep pattern, you might feel otherwise on the next day. And this is what also, according to Fadiman, which was also reported, that you feel different the next day. That might be explainable by these changes during sleep, which you are not conscious of.
Right.
right? Especially if it comes to how long is your REM phase. You don't know that.
Yeah, unless you get some sort of sleep study, right?
Yeah.
That was actually interesting. That was one thing I wrote down in my notes and I wanted to chat about. So thanks for bringing that up, because I did find that really interesting, the extension of REM sleep phases. And I was like, huh.
Yeah, we don't know if that will really be confirmed with newer studies, but I think so, because these studies were kind of solid at that point of time.
Right. It makes me wonder, like, with the extension of REM sleep, people are getting better sleep. They feel different, maybe more rejuvenized.
Yeah, but on the other side, as a side effect, it was also regularly reported that people have a hard time falling asleep with microdosing, especially if they do it in the afternoon or so. And this is also my own experience, that I had a hard time to fall asleep, even with very low doses, like 5 micrograms or so. And so this also shows that there is something registered by the organism. If that has a significant effect on creativity or performance or so on, this is not suggested by me. Who knows?
Right.
Maybe not.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any last bits that you want to close with? And I know this is in conjunction with Breaking Convention, so I want to give a shout out to Breaking Convention's conference that's happening in London on August 16th.
So Breaking Convention is also standing for the assimilation of knowledge about psychedelics into our culture. It's a kind of event which might further that and catalyze that. And so my most recent thoughts about microdosing are, if it's not working as much, why is it there, this trend? Right. It might be a new kind of assimilation process of psychedelics into culture. So we don't do it like in the 60s, taking a larger dose is a better dose. You know, we are taking very small doses, and so we are kind of tentatively nearing the psychedelic effects. You see, I mean, it could be a very slow approach to assimilate psychedelics in another way into society.
Right, and I think I've heard other people say that too. Yeah. Like Paul Austin, he talks about that, I believe, of like this would be the next way to integrate it. Yeah,
kind of. Later on, people might show up and say, "Oh, did you hear about that? They took 10 times the dose and got a mystic experience."
That would be the novel thing from the past.
They discover the old model later on. Might be.
Awesome. Do you have a website anywhere people can find you if they want to learn more? And I definitely recommend people checking out The Science of Microdosing Psychedelics. It's a really great book. But do you have a web presence anywhere that people can find you?
No, I don't know. There will be a microdosing symposium on Breaking Convention on the conference.
Awesome. Which
I will lead, and so we might see us there if somebody's interested in microdosing. And I will give also a short review about all the research about microdosing in a lecture.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, Dr. Passie. Really appreciated your time and just chatting with you. I could probably chat for another hour with you about all this stuff. So, I just appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your time.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Dr. Passie. I know I enjoyed it. Still had a bunch more questions, comments, thoughts about all of his work, and especially around microdosing. I wish had more time with him. An hour goes by quick sometimes. So if you have any questions, comments, anything like that, you feel free to email us, psychedelicstoday@gmail.com. And just a reminder to subscribe. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Podcasts. I don't know where other people are listening to podcasts. Maybe you have your own special podcast app, and there's probably a subscribe button or some sort of RSS feed. So make sure you subscribe there. If you have been working with journeying and you need some extra support, you're trying to integrate the experience, 2 ways that we can help you out. We have our, 3 ways. We have our Navigating Psychedelics course, Lessons on Self-Care and Integration. That's a great option. We also provide integration services, so individual or group work, and there's various packages there. Some include our Navigating Psychedelics course as well. So if you're interested in kind of prepping and then doing some after work, aftercare, and really trying to move your experience forward, we're here for you. We want to support you. We want to see you make some changes in your life post experience. So we want to support you in that. You can check out more information about our integration services at psychedelicstoday.com. Go up to the service tab and there should be an integration. And I don't know, maybe if you're listening to this way in the future, the website has changed and you might have to just do a little bit of poking around, but we'll make it obvious if that happens. And also another great way is our trip journal and integration workbook. You can find those at Amazon. Go over to Amazon, type in Psychedelics Today in the search bar, and those two books should pop up. So if you want kind of a tangible way to work with that, you can order one of those books. There's also PDFs, but PDFs to buy and to download. Those are on our shop, psychedelicstodayshop.com. And grab a shirt. Got some cool stuff up there. Our Psychonaut shirt, and also created some etymology shirts. So if you want to rock a little bit of knowledge, it's probably more for the drug geek or just language geek, breaking down Psychonaut and Psychedelic. So make sure you check those out. That I really kind of like wearing those around, see if anybody kind of catches on, hey, what does that word mean? And you can check those out at psychedelicstodayshop.com. So thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, Dr. Passie, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today.